And his goal with the overall program, which is Shakespeare for All. We would love to end up doing some of these in a factory, in a large hospital complex, in places where you would not normally see Shakespeare. And so this one actually came in at 1 hour and 45 minutes. For those that, have anybody seen Lear before or studied it? A raise of hands, anybody who saw it, maybe a movie or the play version. Well, I mean, I think it's roughly what,
3:45.
3 hours and 45 minutes.
And the whole text.
Yeah. And I'm going to introduce the people on our panel today, but I want to thank each of you for joining us. And our particular production, as I was telling some of the folks, takes place in the Badlands of North Dakota in 1745, when, oddly enough, the British and the French were really in a cauldron fighting over the fur trade. And about 10 years later, we were into the French and Indian War, which everybody kind of knows what that is, but they don't really know how it was simmering and bubbling up and why it really happened. And so we chose that time period and North America, because the whole concept of Shakespeare for All that we're doing is to place each one of these plays somewhere in North America at some point in history. So I know that almost no one except for Calvin, and I want to introduce our designer, Sean McIntosh. Please stand up, honey. Thank you. Sean actually painted 3 huge, okay, I'll make sure I'm talking to you too, darling. 3 huge paintings. And one was painted, they were all landscapes of the area that we were supposedly in, which was very wild. And so he did one on the right wall of the theater, one on the left wall of the theater, and a 15-foot beautiful backdrop of the mountains and a storm that was coming. So anybody who knows anything about Lear, almost the whole second act, we're in a storm. And so anyway, I would like to introduce the folks. We're waiting for a couple more who I think are kind of parking, maybe. 2 actors are going to join us, as far as I know, unless they went to a different library, I don't know. So first off, Clarence Felder is the executive producer of the Actors Theater of South Carolina and the creator of Shakespeare for All. And so please welcome, he also played Kent in our version, Clarence Felder. Next to him is David Lohr, who has been doing Shakespeare for about 30 years. Clarence has been doing Shakespeare for about 50 years. So we were very, very blessed to have 2 amazingly talented Shakespearean actors to be playing Kent. And David Lohr plays King Lear. And so please welcome David Lohr today as actor and scholar. Next to him is a marvelous historian and a gentleman who's been working with us for a while now and is a professor at the Citadel in history, but knows an awful lot about many topics. And his name is Professor Damon Fordham. Please welcome Damon Fordham. Next to him, one of our advisory board members and one of our wonderful historians here, also in very books, lots of different literature, things, everything from Vikings to pirates. This lady has knowledge. You can probably ask her about just about anything, and she will give you some wonderful comment about it. I don't want to embarrass you, but we love you, Alexia Helsley. Now, Alexia is over there at USC Aiken, and also is one of the 2 scholars in our docudrama about John Lawrence. That's an American Revolutionary War period film. A docudrama as well, and she is in it When the other two, if they arrive, I will introduce them. But we have, hopefully, Randall Lee Jr., who played Edgar, and we have Kathleen O'Shaughnessy, who were with us at seminars in the Midlands on Thursday. And so I would like to start out by saying we're going to keep it very simple today. There are certain life lessons that King Lear and the journey of Lear, there are some very powerful, simple life lessons. And that's part of what Shakespeare for All is about. What is the benefit to the audience who comes to see a play like this? What are the lessons that they can go away with that actually can make your life better? So if everybody got one of these, I think you did, if you would grab that, and let's just start from the top. I would like to ask Damon Fordham, who in our group here, he was not able to see the live show, but he saw the DVD. So, sir, is your mic alive there? Let's see if that's...
Okay.
Oh, yeah. So what were your...
Well, I have a big mouth anyways.
Well, what were your reactions when you saw the DVD about this adaptation?
Well, it was pretty good. I mean, whenever I watch anything with Shakespeare, I kind of keep this along with me as a guide. So, because as you know, when you watch a Shakespearean play raw, it's kind of difficult to follow unless you kind of have some idea what's going on. So I was sort of keeping along with this in order to make sure that I understood what was going on. And then too, another thing that's very helpful in the case of King Lear in particular is this book, Geoffrey of Monmouth's The History of the Kings of Britain. Now, this is a book written in 1136 AD by Geoffrey of Monmouth, who was a monk in those days. And he captured all the ancient British folklore about King Arthur and Merlin and Lady Genevieve, as well as the earliest version of King Lear. And his version of King Lear has like the core characters of the daughters Goneril. I hope I'm saying that right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
Great.
you might pull back just an inch or two, yeah.
Yeah, these mics are feeding that.
Well, like I said, I have a big mouth anyway. I don't need this. So y'all can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's it.
It has an echo.
Anyway,
He can talk.
it has the main characters of King Lear and the Duke of Albany, as well as Edgar and Cordelia. And it has a very core version of the story in here without a lot of the other characters and so forth. But on the whole, reading both this version, the DVD, and reading this along with it, once you get past the language and the plot twists and all of that, the story is really not that complex. And the very essence of it, without ruining it to people, is the idea of sincerity versus insincerity, and whether you love a person because of their humanity or what they can get for you, what's in it for you in the long run. And basically, I see the play as a struggle with that. The struggle of, in other words, the struggle of true love versus an opportunistic version of love.
And which characters would you say really give you those lessons?
Well, on a number of levels, I would say that the first two daughters, Goneril and Regan, they're very opportunistic in this thing, and that they're basically trying to tell the old man what they want, they think he wants to hear, so that they could get this inheritance. But Cordelia, she's not having that. Essentially, she just tells him the truth about what she feels about him, and he's so used to people flattering him that he can't deal with that. But yet, without ruining it for all y'all, through the course of his madness and his descent and all that, he comes to see who really loves him when he's stripped basically down to his lowest level and nothing in the final analysis.
Yeah. Would you say, the first one here, be careful who you trust. Now, That's true for all of us, isn't it? Has anyone, raise of hands, has anyone had anyone in their family lie to them?
Oh,
Yeah. Oh, well, we have two people who never lied to
You're
them.
lucky.
You are blessed. You are blessed.
Maybe they're the ones that lie to the
I'm lying.
He's lying. I like it. I love it.
And if anybody wants, we're waiting on our Cordelia, who also plays the fool, and then I want to do the rest of my introduction. But anybody a little further back there, we would love for you to come up in the front row, because we would love to have you a part of this discussion. So come on up. Get a little closer. Oh, come on, y'all.
You can't all do that. Don't rush.
I would actually like to ask another
We
question.
don't storm. We won't abide.
I'd like to sit back there. We'll just have to
Okay,
project.
all right.
I'd like to ask a question too, because Professor Fordham twice said not to spoil it for anyone. Is there anyone in the room right now who has not read King Lear or seen a production of it or seen a film of it at
Ever.
some time? Who doesn't know how it ends or?
I mean, it's been since high school or something.
Yeah.
And
So,
you're so ancient.
College.
so
you
no
know,
hands
right?
went up, which means.
Years.
Now,
Be
this
brave,
lady-
be brave.
The lady in pink, you've never seen it or read it. Aha. Well,
Matter.
yeah, it doesn't matter. We hope,
Lady in
see,
pink
we
over
hope
here.
to build an appetite for you to see it online. Hey, Brandy, come on up, honey. Come and sit in the front row.
Hi, Brandy.
This is Brandy Small, one of our actresses.
will stone you.
So what we'd like to do is make sure that you leave here thinking, wow, I'm going to go onto YouTube and I'm going to watch this thing. Or there will be a way, can we have a seat, honey? There'll be a way for you to buy it as a DVD. So, now, David, did you have any other thoughts about who, be careful who you trust?
Well, another thing that I found interesting in that is the whole relationship between Edmund and his father.
Oh, yeah.
Because with that, you kind of see how mores have changed over the years. Because see, today, if you were born out of wedlock, you know, that's really no big deal.
Yeah.
It's of almost no consequence. As opposed to even 50 years ago when I was born in that situation, it was a big deal in my family. Whereas today, it's nothing. But it also shows you how in Shakespeare's time, I mean, they refer to him repeatedly as a quote, forgive me some of y'all, whoreson and all of that.
Yeah.
And he kind of takes that in stride, but you could kind of see how all of this makes him bitter and treacherous
Right.
in the long run. And to me, I think that that's an example of how, you know, they have that old saying of children live what they learn. So obviously, if people are just constantly putting him down over something that he has no control over, he's obviously not going to grow up to have any sort of loyalty to humanity or anybody else. So that's another way you can look at it.
Yeah, I think with Edmund, ambition is good, but at what point does it become dangerous, right? And
And, well, there's more to bastardy in medieval England. I mean, the kings were famous, especially Henry I had at least 31 we know of. Because he paid for them their education and he married them all off well.
Yeah.
So it's all in the papers.
Yeah.
I love
He
documents.
did the right thing.
Yeah, he did the right thing. So I think that in this case, it didn't have to transpire badly, except that the young man coveted, which is another sin.
Yes.
He coveted what his brother had. Because if you look at it logically, he was in not a worse position than any second or third born son, because only the firstborn, primogenitor, was going to inherit anything. One had to go into the church, one had to go into the army. There wasn't land but for one. And he wanted his share, he wanted these women, I mean, he wanted everything. Which gets at a question about that you can't look at this on some Renaissance levels, because Shakespeare is post-Renaissance, but he's really more English Renaissance.
Right.
Does man exist for society or society exists for man? What are the limitations on individuality and maximizing the person, which this young man, I think, personifies attempts to maximize all that he could be. At what cost?
Yeah, at what cost? You know, he also knows that he is the favorite. Even though he's the bastard son, he knows that Gloucester likes him best. And in comes our Cordelia, who also plays the fool. Here's your seat up here, darling. Oh yes. Oh yes. No way out of it. And now, what I'd like to do,
Now that she's here, we want to finish the introduction, and that includes thanking the wonderful folks at the South Carolina Humanities. We applied for a grant, and we got one for both Midsummer Night's Dream and King Lear. Now we're going to be applying again in August for 2 more. But we want to thank the wonderful panel there on the Commission of South Carolina Humanities, and also for partial funding the Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation. Now they're up there in Illinois, but they have a lot of involvement here in the Low Country. And we have been very blessed to have support from that foundation for the last roughly 10 years. So we want to thank them. And also, the gentleman who's behind the camera there, he's going to come up now. And we want to thank the library and Mr. Michael Bell. Who's going to make him up.
Thank you all for attending. I just wanted to mention that the library has this collection of Shakespeare plays made by the BBC in the early 1980s. And I just watched King Lear the other 3 nights. I watched it. It's 185 minutes, so I watched it 3 nights. But if you'd like to see the entire play or all of Shakespeare's plays, please go to our DVD section and you can check out any of these. So thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. We also have had an afternoon of 4 of our family films here also, and we plan to do that again, perhaps this summer. Come on in, darling. I've got your daughter up here. Yeah, I forced her up here. Both Allison and Brandy Smalls will be part of the gospel singers that will be with us for Piccolo Spoleto when we are over at Circular Congregational Church during that festival. So please do welcome Allison and Brandy Smalls. All right, now we're going to take it back to our one of the big lessons. Be careful who you trust. And that's not just in your family, but we know that in business and in friendships and all that, be careful who you trust. And I would like to ask David how you responded as playing King Lear, how you learned from the play as you were learning King Lear.
On that issue?
Yeah. Just because you're covering so many bases, what we like to do is start with be careful who you trust. And you know, Cordelia's sitting right here.
Yeah.
I told you so.
Well, one of the things I actually kept chuckling about through the entire rehearsal process, and by the way, as Chris said, I've been doing Shakespeare for a while. I worked for 9 years for a company that's now called the American Shakespeare Center up in Virginia. I was a member of their Blackfriars resident troupe there. So I performed Shakespeare all year round for 9 years and have done a number of the plays a number of times, but had never actually been in a production of Lear before this one and had not played Lear. I thought I was going to get an opportunity in 2008 and didn't get that opportunity. So in a way, it's a play that I knew fairly well. I'd read it a lot of times. I'd seen the Ian Holm version. I'd seen Ian McKellen's version. I'd seen a number of versions of it. But as an actor, I didn't feel that I knew it very well in the way that you do get to know a role in a play when you finally are in it and get to play it a number of times. So I was in a way learning the lessons of the play this time as we rehearsed it and performed it. This particular issue, I got some chuckles about because I kept asking my fellow actors, how did this guy get to be 80 years old and have daughters who are presumably in their 50s. Well, yeah, have daughters in their 30s maybe. And not realize that he's spawned a couple of snakes. And not realize very much about his own nature, as a matter of fact. And so, at the beginning of the play, here's a man who's reached the pinnacle of his power. He's been at the pinnacle of his power for a long time. And as we talked about it beforehand, to the point that he kind of feels, I'm going to sit back, I'm going to turn it over to the girls and rest on my laurels. I've done all the work to create this kingdom, and now let somebody else shoulder it for a while. And he doesn't even realize that that's going to set off a power struggle among his two snake daughters to try to get everything away from him. And he doesn't even have the sort of awareness, I think, of human nature to realize exactly what Professor Fordham brought up, that two of them are simply flattering him in the way that his courtiers do, telling him what he wants to hear, and that the one who says, I love you the way a daughter is supposed to love her father, is actually the one whom he should be honoring. She's the only one who's actually just being honest and telling him the truth about how she feels, that she's not going to fawn all over him, that she does have allegiance to her husband-to-be, and she's not going to simply say, I owe you everything, I love you more than I'll ever love anyone else. So he starts off at this kind of amazing level of ignorance almost, or a lack of awareness. Definitely
Dangerous ego.
Yeah. And I think most scholars, to kind of take a step back from it, most scholars that I've read and talked to will say that one of the primary things that Shakespeare was doing throughout his body of work, particularly the history plays, but also the dramatic works as well, was examining the nature of kingship and asking, what is a king? What is a worthy king? Who deserves to be king? Why does someone have the divine right to be king? But if you have the divine right to be king, what do you then also have to do to be a worthy king, to be worthy of that title? And I can't help but think he was probably speaking to Elizabeth in a lot of what he wrote, asking her to examine kingship, asking the people around her and the British people to examine the nature of kingship. And Lear, oddly enough, proves himself not very worthy of the title that he has. And so he gets systematically stripped of it. It's systematically stripped of everything, not just material possessions, but the love of his daughters and eventually his sanity. So I don't know how to end that point exactly.
Well, I would say that when the fool says, and I will say it wrong, but the fool says you should not have been old before you were wise. Now, I would agree with that. Now that I'm old, I look back and I go, how come, whatever shreds of wisdom I have cobbled together, why didn't I see some of this stuff 40 years ago, you know? But I think the fool, what Kathleen and I realized was that literally...
Get the amens in.
Yeah, oh, okay.
Yeah, 10 years ago.
Yeah, can I get an amen? Right. The fool, it turns out, and we're going to share a little thing that happened in one of the seminars on Thursday, which really surprised all of us. And we haven't, I don't know if I've told you this yet either, but it turns out in the course of rehearsal, I kept noticing over and over, more and more, that everything the fool said was really relevant on the main level and the secondary and tertiary level. It was truly amazing. And poor Kathleen, who was playing Cordelia too, she began to see it, and we would see it together, and she would get bolder and bolder with this tough dude over here, and have, as an actor, enough courage to let him have it, you know. And we were trying to find a way to make it clear that in our modern day, really top leaders, if you think of the guy who's running the company you were working with, or the leaders that you've known or worked for, they almost always do have somebody like the fool. People have somebody like that usually in their circle. And in this case, the fool decides that even though he's behaved so badly, the fool is going to stay with him, and at a certain point in the play, as some of you know, the fool disappears. Shakespeare never tells you what happened to the fool. We made a decision in our production, which you'll see if you see it online. But I wanted to mention one thing that happened in the seminar in the Midlands. Someone who's been with Marvel Comics for over 50 years. He's a friend of our company, and they're donors, and they've come to many of our shows. And we kind of involved him, and we'd like to involve y'all in our discussion. And he said that, and this guy created Conan the Barbarian, and he ghost wrote the Spider-Man for 20 years, and his buddy Stan Lee actually has just passed on, for those of you who are comic people. But anyway, he admitted in our discussion that he used the fool. And I don't know, Clarence, do you remember the character? It was something that he wrote.
Vision.
The
Well,
Submariner.
I don't know if it was
the
Vision.
story, but he said that he
Well, they
had.
were talking about that one.
Yeah, he did mention Vision, but not in relation to the fool. There was somebody like 15 years ago he had created.
He said, I think the character called the Submariner. I don't know.
The
comics.
Submariner. I'm not a Marvel aficionado, but it was interesting that there we were talking about Shakespeare, and here was a writer for Marvel that was saying, you know, I have taken characters from Shakespeare for what I have written. And Clarence was just telling me that Beethoven had told friends who asked, how did you get inspired for this or that piano concerto? Beethoven
That was a
said,
sonata. Yeah.
oh, it's a sonata. He said, what? Go read what?
Shakespeare's Tempest.
Yeah, he said, go read The Tempest. So what we're gathering is a lot of different sort of current cultural resonance for a lot of Shakespeare's characters that we can all identify with. So that covers that. The next thing we've talked about, beware of dangerous ego. Well, we talked about how Lear made a mistake, but what was the mistake that Cordelia made that day, right?
Well, starting off with nothing, I have nothing to say, might not have been the most gentle introduction to constructive criticism of her father. I think it is, and we had talked about this before. I think the way that this production was set up was that everyone coming in knew that Lear intended to divide the land between his 3 daughters, and he just sprung this "Who loves me best" little competition
Out of
on them.
nowhere.
And the thing is, if you're looking at what Shakespeare is actually saying, it's even in the stage direction to the speeches, it's not even really a competition. When Gyril speaks, he rips up and gives her section, then Regan speaks and he rips up and gives her presumably the section she was already going to have. So it's what they said wasn't getting them, it was basically, to be super meta about it, theater. And Cordelia just refused to participate in it, and it's not that she didn't love her father. She even in fact says, I love you as is right fit. I obey you, love you, and most honor you. You gave me life and you loved me. I owe you love. But she doesn't, what she's calling out is the theater of it, and why do we have to this showy nonsense, and saying that I owe you all is not, you should love your husband too. It's not, he's not entitled to everything, and I think Lear had been, and I don't think Cordelia was taking some firm moral stance of setting herself up as a martyr. I think she'd always been Daddy's favorite, and she expected to get away with this, as she had with a lot of other things, and she didn't. And I think it really emphasized what David had been mentioning about the nature of kingship. Lear had been surrounded by yes people for so long that he couldn't deal with even what I think it wasn't politely worded, but it wasn't like a complete
Mean-spirited.
pronunciation. It wasn't mean-spirited either, and I think he hadn't heard no in so long that he just didn't know how to deal with it and react.
Wow.
And again, but also Cordelia could have maybe said this privately instead of laughing at him in front of his entire court.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, the way he asks you the question is disingenuous, because he says, what can you say to earn a third more opulent than your sisters? When, as you said, he's already given the other 2/3
Right.
away.
Yeah.
There's only 1/3 left. So, unless everybody knows that that's the opulent third, there's nothing she can say to earn it. And my second point was going to be that there are, I think, precisely for that reason, because they're the people who tell kings exactly what they want to hear, which causes the kings to stop listening and make themselves unworthy kings.
We did have just grab that chair head and sit next to Claire. This is our Edgar. He's the good son. And I will introduce officially now Randall Lee Jr., who really had a trial by fire. He called our company for private lessons about 6 months ago now, and he was doing so well in a private session with me. A couple of times I said, Clarence, we're auditioning. Lear, I think you're going to look at this kid. You know, he's really gifted. And so he beat out everybody to play one of the most difficult roles ever written in all of literature.
All right.
So yay! And a lot of these folks, Randall, have never seen our production. And so when they see it on the YouTube, you will be amazed. Now, I wanted to just bring in the second father for a minute here. We had Lear with his 3 daughters, and for the lady who's never read or seen it, we're going to say there's a second family. There's Gloucester, and Lord Gloucester, or Duke of Gloucester, and in our production, we didn't do a lot of royalty kind of stuff. It was like leadership and power more than royalty. So Gloucester has 2 sons. He's got his favorite, who's the bastard son, Edmund. There's a picture of him back there. When you leave, you can take a look at our Edmund. And he's a letter carrier. He's working today. And Randall, by the way, is a FedEx driver. So, and so we had the fellow who was a Caucasian father, and he had 2 African American sons. One was a legal son, which was Edgar, and then he had the illegitimate son, Edmund. But he loved Edmund more. We get the feeling that maybe he loved Edmund's mother more, and maybe that was part of it, and that maybe Gloucester was secretly trying to figure out, how can I give Edmund as much as possible? So it didn't take all that much for Gloucester to be tricked by Edmund. Once again, he chose the wrong one to believe. So somebody just made that analogy of Lear chooses the 2 phony sisters who were, really flattering him, and he should have chosen. He should have been more patient with Cordelia that day, and Cordelia, rightly so, should have been more patient with her father that day. He needed a little sugar, he needed a little patience. He needed, I guess, I better, play along with Dad. And she didn't. And she really made a mistake. And he says a little later, how small, when things start falling apart, how small was her fault? I shouldn't have been so mean to her that day and banished her. Well, let's move on to, there are a number of times where people forgive. So, Clarence,
Yes.
having played Kent, one of the first wonderful lessons of forgiveness is the character of Kent. How does that happen?
Well, one night in rehearsal, Mr. Lohr looked at me and said, "Do you think that Kent is the moral center of the play?" And I thought about it, and yeah, he is. And I think the reason he is to me, and this is the second time I've essayed this, is because it doesn't matter what people say to some of us. What matters is what you do.
Right.
Yeah, right.
And I don't care why you do what you do. I just want to know what you're going to do. And then watch you do it. Or not do it. I think Aristotle said that about character in drama. Is action. Is determines your character. C.S. Lewis used it too in his books and stories. What matters is what action you take or don't take, not what you say. The other thing I would say is that, and this really brought me up short Thursday night, Mr. Glenn James, our scholar from Carolina, he said, once Lear is dead, Kent has nothing in his life. He's so committed and so loyal, but to this one man.
Oh, that was it.
And when he dies,
What do I do now?
and I had no answer for that, because I don't think it's true, frankly, but it was something to contemplate, because Kent is so pragmatic. And a lot of times people say, oh, well, he says, I have a journey shortly to go. My master calls me, I cannot say no. Which people say it means he's going to commit suicide to join his master. I don't think so. Kent, I don't think Kent would do that. Kent's going to go bury him like he deserves, and then he's going to, and Cordelia, and the other daughters too, probably, and everybody.
They're all dead.
It's amazing. But then he's going to come back and help.
Sorry.
Because they choose Edgar to run the kingdom. And Albany, who had the right to have it apparently, but he says, no, I want Edgar and Kent. And Kent says, I can't do it right now, but Edgar says he will. And then I think Kent comes back. But there's one other thing I'd like to say about forgiveness. I am a Christian, and I am instructed in the Bible to forgive and forget. And I often do my best after clenching my teeth and calmly counting and waiting before I... Sometimes I don't, and then there are problems, but a great Christian writer and Shakespeare commentator once said, that's Dr. Samuel Johnson, he said, revenge is often God's justice completed. And that's the way I think about it too.
And
Yeah.
that often involves humans as the agent of revenge.
And every night when this one would kill his brother, I'd be backstage going, yes! Got him.
Karma.
Yeah. But anyway, that's what I have to
Well, I
say
wanted to
about
ask you,
forgiveness.
Clarence,
Yes.
why do you think, is it simply just loyalty that Kent has such a reason to be enraged when Lear has just said, if you're here after 10 days, you're going down. We're gonna kill you if you're still here after 10 days. This long friendship is suddenly like over, and Kent could have just said, all right, I'm gone. I'm not coming back.
Right.
But the fact, for the lady who hasn't seen it, he comes back disguised. And in our production, he comes back as a Métis half-breed Native American. And so imagine that guy over there in a beautiful long wig, and he had this great spear with him. And so Lear doesn't recognize him. You know? And I really believed you when you said, who are you? You know, what are you? You know? And he says, well, I'm looking to serve someone, and you have in your face authority, and I would serve you. And so I believe that Kent is the very first example of great forgiveness.
Yeah.
I mean, would we do that? Would all of us forgive somebody who would do that to us?
Depends.
No.
Yeah.
Is
What
there
do
a
you
death
think?
sentence if I hang around hanging over my head? Because I think I might be making
I
tracks.
suspect it depends what your goal is. That if you are trying to do something such as keep a family together, you forgive much.
Amen.
in pursuit of that. So Kent may actually be forgiving because he thinks the whole is greater than this particular contract here with Lear. That maybe the kingdom's worth saving, or maybe Lear's worth saving. That there is something bigger than what's going on. I don't know, but surely you've had work situations,
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
yes, where someone, as they might say, did you dirt,
Yeah.
and you may get reassigned, demoted, whatever. But in the economy of the time, depending upon one's, who you're taking care of, what your obligations are, you might stay, you might do until something better comes along.
Right.
But you can't do it bitterly and still maintain your sanity. You see, that didn't work so well for somebody. And, and your soul, I mean, so that you have to forgive in order to move on and live on a different plane.
What do you think, Professor Porter, about that?
Well, again, I think it depends on the individual when it comes to the whole issue of forgiveness, because, see, one thing I've come to understand about that is that we're products of our own experiences, and each of our experiences are different, you see. Whereas some people are so scarred from their experience, because we don't really know, I mean, we know what we see in this play, but we aren't really sure of the backstories
Yeah.
of any of this. So unless we would to know that, then we could kind of say for sure. So I really think it just depends on the individual as far as this type of thing goes.
And in this case, it's Kent,
Right,
and we know there's been a big, long history.
right,
And at one point, he says, Clarence and I have talked about this several times, he really gives Lear some great wisdom. Take back your power. Don't do this. This is wrong. So it's not just, oh, you shouldn't be upset with Cordelia. You shouldn't be giving up your responsibility because it's bad. And King David in the Bible is an example. In the spring when kings go forth, he decided to kick back and be on his laurels, and everything started falling apart. So one thing that was mentioned on Thursday when we were in the Midlands was he really made a mistake by giving away, taking his total responsibility.
Well,
And-
I think also, Chris, excuse me, one might draw the lesson that unlike King David, maybe you shouldn't watch your beautiful neighbor taking a bath.
especially if you're young enough, especially if you're young enough to do something about it.
Oh, that's funny.
So
Well,
anyway,
One of the first things that Kent
Yeah.
says to Lear is, see better, Lear.
oh
And
yeah,
there's
yeah.
one of the motifs that runs through the whole play is identity and seeing and being able to see a person for who they are.
Yeah.
When Gloucester arrives on the heath, Lear looks right at him and doesn't know who he is. Kent, he looks right at Kent and doesn't know who Kent is. And so if you tell someone see better, I think maybe it's not too much of a stretch to infer that you know he can see better. You've been with him a long time.
Absolutely.
You've been with him
Yeah.
through times when he saw better than
Yeah.
this. You can see that his vision is clouded, he's not seeing
Right,
properly.
right.
And the loyalty, I think, is with the hope of bringing him back to what he once was.
I think so.
Well, let's move to the second major point of forgiveness. And Edgar can tell us about at what point in the play, you know, your father has ordered your death, right? And you've been on the run. So at what point do you forgive him?
Thinking about my character and Edgar,
You might
And-
stand up just because of the camera,
Oh.
and we want to hear you.
and kind of comparing Edgar to Kent, how
Like, check.
That's a little
Yeah.
too close. Yeah, keep it up.
and just basically comparing Edgar to Kent, like how Kent purposely came back into the kingdom, you know, to do whatever it is that he did. And then Edgar, as he was banished, you know, my objective was to get out of there. You know, I wasn't looking to, you know, meet these guys on the heath or anything like that, you know, and let alone, you know, see my father.
Yeah, oh,
You
yeah.
know, so it was challenging for me, and I would say the point of forgiveness is when I saw my father with his eyes plucked up, and you know, I kind of thought about that a little bit, and you know, as I was taking him to what did they call it? The,
James Bay,
James
the
Bay,
cliff.
yeah, taking him to the cliff to, you know, because he wanted to commit suicide, obviously, and you know, I think Edgar carrying his no-eyed father to the cliff, and I mean, I began to think about how was he feeling, or what was it that was so compelling for him, you know, to, you know, like, how do you fathom that?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so
You're carrying a lot more weight than
It-
just the physical weight.
Exactly. And then, you know, when, you know, I placed him hypothetically at the end of the cliff, and, you know, to where he was about to commit suicide and everything, and he confessed and he said, you know, forgive him for, you know, banishing or doing what he did to Edgar.
Sure.
And, you know, I'm standing right there as he's saying that, and I'm like, that's another point of forgiveness. You know, it's like, okay, well, my father really does love me.
Yeah.
He really does care about me. And, you know, it's just an amazing journey, as far as, you know, the duration of the whole play. And you know, I also think about, you know, going back to Lear's character, like, when he banished Kent, like, what was going through his mind? You know, when they have the type of relationship that they had, for you to tell somebody that you're that close to, you know, if you're caught, I mean, you're dead, brother. It's like, oh man, like, yeah, and you know, like I said, for Kent to come back into the kingdom and to do what he did, and, you know, to hear y'all's opinion as far as, like, motives. You know, his reason for doing whatever it is he did, you know, as far as keeping families together and all that kind of stuff like that. So, you know, it's been very challenging, and the journey has just been, it's been beautiful for me.
Well, I want to add that he was so humble. He never ever imagined to be the ruler. I mean, it almost comes as a surprise at the end. The audience realizes so many of them are dead. Who's left to know, you know? And it just naturally floats over to Albany, who then says, "Look, you're the humble man who can actually put this back together." And for me as an audience member, I'm going, "Yeah, we got a chance. You know, we're going to put it back together."
So the guy who pretends to be insane in order to survive becomes the king, whereas the king
Yes.
becomes insane and loses everything.
Yeah. Dr. Glenn James brought up these incredible ironies in the play, and even directing it. I found some of them, but ever since we closed about 3 weeks ago, I'm finding myself washing the dishes, and I'm hearing another line, and I'm going, wow, the irony of that. So there's tremendous irony that you can mine from just seeing this 2 or 3 or 4 times. I guarantee you. Yes, sir.
Well, one thing that I think is kind of ironic is the fact that at various times in British history, the ending was revised to a happier
Oh
one.
yeah, Clarence, you and Clarence know that. For 100 years, there was a happy ending.
Oh, wow.
More than that, it's almost 140 years. That was
Oh,
the
wow.
stage version in London. That was done and applauded a lot.
Yeah, wasn't it Dr. Johnson that said, "I can't bear this in here,
Yeah,
I
he said,
can't
well,
see it."
Johnson said, I can't read this last scene anymore. I can't stand
So
it.
it was
It's so-
that Lear lived?
Well, not only that,
Cordelia.
but at the beginning, Cordelia sees Edgar and falls in love with him. And that's why she says no to these other noble people, and that's why he gets angry. Yeah, but by the end, Cordelia and Edgar get married.
Rule the kingdom.
And Lear says, come on, to Kent and I think it's Gloucester, yeah, Kent and Gloucester, and says, come on, boy, we're going to go in the monk's cell here and talk about what we just went through.
He gets to retire after all.
Yeah, and let's go through this all over again. And then these two get married and they rule the kingdom, and everybody's lovely, and there are lots of Disney kind of bluebirds singing.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Am I right in thinking that this happy ending?
Happily ever after.
Yeah, the happy ending.
Yes, ma'am.
Prevailing. That concept was popular during Victorian times.
Well,
There's an overlap there.
Not by the, no, it depends on what you mean by Victorian. She ruled a long
Well,
time.
yeah, early 1800s. right
But
on
no,
through
it was,
1901.
yeah, it
it
was,
was reunification of England, right?
yeah, and I think it was Garrick,
So it's before that?
maybe. Was it
David
Garrick?
Garrick?
I think it was Garrick who said, enough of this.
So it's.
He wrote it this way. I think it was him.
I was just curious,
I
but
don't
because there would have been some reason at that particular time why that concept.
It has
was
something
taken
to do with the English reunification, but he has to
Yeah.
refresh me on that one.
Yeah,
Okay.
but what here? I'll tell you this: as we got about a week from opening,
Oh, yeah, tell him. That's the
I literally looked at Chris one day while I was drinking my 8th cup of coffee, trying to get up courage enough to go in and look at this thing again, my part, and I said, "Why don't we do the happy ending?" I was serious.
We weren't
I
gonna
wasn't
do
joking.
this.
I wanted to
No,
do
he brought it
the
up to me, and I kept
Yeah.
wondering whether it was ever going to happen. The final night, I thought, is this the night that Clarence is going to say we should do the happy ending?
Yeah.
That we've never rehearsed.
Well, and it wasn't going to be the happy ending they did for 140 years. All we wanted was to have Cordelia, who's
Right.
dead.
But no, well, yeah, but Lear is not dead. He's
Not
holding
dead
her.
yet. And he says to them at one point, look, she's not dead. And the rest of our 13 actors on stage, right? You know, we were going to have Kathleen simply just raise her dead
Saturday night!
and we thought, just for the last show, you know, let's see what will happen to the other actors on stage, right? And the audience. I could imagine people in the audience going, wait a minute. She dies. What is she coming back? And
By
then
the
the
way,
lights would be going
now,
down.
David, I want to tell you, Mr. Lord really got some great humor in this part, and I've seen it a lot of times. I want to applaud him for finding some kind of leavening humor
Right.
in this boom,
So
boom,
heavy, yeah.
boom.
And the
thing
fool,
that's going
too.
on.
The
Oh, well,
fool
yeah,
ball.
but it's written for Kent and the Fool. It was given to us by Shakespeare, but it's more subtle in his case, and he took advantage of it, and I'm very grateful.
Yeah, we
to him.
were so blessed.
Wow.
In response to your question, I was going to toss in one thing that a number of people have heard me say, and it's not attributable to me. It was actually said by Dr. Ralph Cohen, who founded Shenandoah Shakespeare Express, that I worked for a long time. He said, if you look at Shakespeare's work, when the female perspective rules the play, it ends with a circle dance, and it's a comedy. When the male perspective rules the play, at the end of the play, the stage is littered with bodies, and it's a tragedy. And actually, you can kind of
That is
take
really.
that across
That's
the
true.
board.
One more
Right,
question.
so in making it a happy ending, perhaps you're
Yeah,
kind of taking
yeah,
on
that's
the
really- I've never heard that
female
before.
perspective rather than the male.
One more question. Does anybody know of any other plays that were also changed to a happy ending?
Merchant of Venice, I know, was for a
Oh.
long time.
Yeah, that's a
ended-
trap, man.
Was ended with Shylock's.
That's a time bomb.
Yeah.
Because the whole Jewish issue?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, whatever it might be, I just think if they tried it with one tragedy, why wouldn't
Well,
they try it with another?
Chris was part of one production out in San Francisco.
Yeah.
And it was done modern day. That was what happened. We were in the Geary Theater in San Francisco, and Merchant of Venice was happening, 1993 or whatever it was. And I was in the scene where, and anybody knows the actress Michael Learned, who played, this is before she got, it's before she played Mama Walton. She was doing Portia, and her husband at the time, a fabulous Canadian actor, Peter Donat, was playing Shylock. And she gets to the place where she says, and on your knees, Jew, da-da-da-da-da-da. Well, from the second row of the theater, a man first stood up and said, shame, shame, get up, and everybody on stage, people, tears were flying out of eyes, people were panicking, somebody started to faint, and then somebody escorted that guy out, and then two other people. They went on as if nothing had happened, but then two other people stood up, and they were screaming.
And I don't blame them.
The balcony. and I mean, really, I'll never forget it as long as I live. And then I will say, Ellis Robb took that production to Lincoln Center. They did it, same production at Lincoln Center. I don't think they had the same problems, but I just don't like that play. Because
I don't like it either.
I mean, I love Portia. I love her Quality of Mercy speech. It's fabulous. But anyway, going back to the third level of forgiveness happens with Cordelia. And obviously she could have stayed away, right? So would you explain, why do you think she came back?
Well, I think there were two levels of forgiveness to that. First, Cordelia,
A little bit further away, yeah.
Cordelia came back to with an army to first it would just not would have been sensible to come back alone. She's met her sisters, but also this, in addition, as we talked about, a lot of this is about the nature of leadership and kingship. This country is falling apart under the leadership of Goneril and Regan and their husbands, because in addition to being terrible people, I think there's a thread through the play. They're also terrible leaders for many of the same reasons. And I think she forgave her father at like a basic level of, I'm going to treat this sick old man like a decent human being would, even if I didn't like him or want to spend any time with him. I'm not going to leave him to die in the street. That's just that's not being a loving daughter. That's being a borderline basis of being a decent human being. And then in the scene, I think she really came to forgive her father, just to think, if I had been less snarky just with my father in public that day, this would not have happened.
Wow.
He would not have been stranded, sick and alone, and lost his wits in the on the heath. Because she even says at the beginning of the play to her sisters, I know what you are. She might not have known exactly to the extent that it would have gotten, but she knew they would not care for their father, while she would have, put up with him. She might not have been thrilled with the 100 nights in her house, but she would have gotten through it. And then also, but then as she's seeing what's happened, she's just forgiving her father. And I think one of the big parts of the tragedy is that it can be left a little bit ambiguous, and I think it played for me different ways, different nights. Is the man standing in front of her now is not the father she grew up with, and the father she remembers.
Yeah.
So much has been stripped from him by this experience that are they even able to connect in the way that they did before, that the forgiveness can truly be felt. So I thought it was a very powerful moment. And I think the reason people wanted a happy ending for this so much is what makes it a great tragedy, that you don't want these people to die, you want something else for them, and they're just like the inexorable, I'm not even going to try that word.
Inexorable, I think.
Inexorable. It's the result of everything that's happened, just taken to the nth degree, and it was like a runaway train that couldn't be stopped, and that you don't want it to end the way it is, the way that it is inevitably going to, which is what makes it a tragedy. Yeah, this. It's like there's
That's
there's
interesting.
humanity that's added to the characters and how much you recognize in this of your own family dynamics and how
Sure.
some of the times the smallest thing gets turned into a years-long vendetta. When, with the benefit of age and experience, and sometimes when it's too late, you see now,
It doesn't matter.
should have just let it go,
Right.
had another cup of coffee.
Right.
Yeah.
And God bless them. Yeah. Say a prayer for that family member.
Bless your
Um,
heart. Bless your heart.
So,
That isn't always exactly what we mean when we say that.
Let's have some fried chicken and forget about it.
I think we can all agree that there are many, many benefits
Are you a ringer?
to, and many lessons to learn
This is everything.
about how to live and how not to make certain mistakes in King Lear. And this production, we only have a few minutes left here, but we would love to take any questions. You know, you had, that was an excellent question. Are there any questions? Let's mix it up here. The humanities love to have a little, you know, discussion. So who's got a question? I guess all of you have wonderful family experiences. Yes.
What about where it says if you want to lead a moral life?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Okay. If there is actually good and evil, this is my opinion, and I think Shakespeare's opinion was there was evil behavior and there was good behavior. And so if you want to live a life where you are basically doing those basic things of caring for people, caring for yourself, caring for your family, taking responsibility for what you should take responsibility for, there are certain people, who do we talk about? Kent, Cordelia, Edgar. We didn't talk much about Albany, but Albany is an example of somebody who was married to a vicious snake, as David would say, and he begins to realize it. And in the course of the play, he goes from sort of being a co-conspirator and begins to realize this is going too far. This is bad. And I've got to do something to stop this. So I think we all have an understanding of how, did I cross the line? Did I go too far? Do I need to ask forgiveness from somebody? Or, so does that answer your question?
Well,
So
it does.
because we live in a culture right now that is so relative. Oh, well, that's good for you. And I'm glad that works for you. But, you know, I don't know. Yes, Terry.
Well, a couple of nights ago, we talked about it being a morality play, and I think we're getting close to that now.
Yeah.
Right.
Like you said, anything goes now, but sin was talked about in here by Lear, and I'm sure others.
Mhm.
Sin was identified, and everyone recognized it as sinful behavior, which was destructive. And that's the heart of a morality play, right?
Yes.
Right, that there are consequences for your actions.
Yeah,
right.
yeah, actions
That's right.
have consequences. And I wanted to make a point that maybe
Long-term.
Clarence and David could speak to. Lear on the heath in the storm, he suddenly gets this conscience about, you know, how come and I might be saying this wrong, David, if you would pick it up. He says, why don't we care for the poor and the sick, and why aren't we doing that? And I think it's almost like he's saying, why haven't I paid more attention to this? So how would you respond to that?
Even in this shortened version, twice he says, "You scurvy political elites, we need to take care of the poor among us in order to tenderly guide them toward the justice of heaven." Back on your point about it being a morality play, I was really struck again, even in a shortened adaptation, about how many times he appeals to the gods. It's clear that the gods are up there, the gods are watching us, the gods are judging us. I do think it's a realization. He's speaking as if he is speaking to other politicians, but it's clearly a realization of what he should have been doing all this time as well, taking care of
the lesser among us.
Yeah, it's like part of the transition from being a bit too ego-ridden into being and losing everything, and then being able to see things he hadn't seen before. How come I didn't see this before? And he becomes very wise in his. And here's the big question that everybody asks: was Lear really mad? How do you answer that?
I didn't realize anybody asked that of Lear. People always ask that about Hamlet, who straight out says, "I'm going to act crazy." I just have always assumed that Lear genuinely goes mad. Yeah.
Because who would want to lose everything like that? I mean,
Maybe mad at himself.
So you think he really is, he goes
Oh, yeah.
into mental illness?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
I think Shakespeare's point is, if you think you are here, then you are going to have everything taken away from you systematically over the course of, in this case, a relatively short period of time, and you are going to end up as nothing. And scholars, what is it? How many times is it the word nothing gets used in there? It's 57 or something like that.
Wow.
That the word nothing
You can't
appears.
make nothing from nothing.
Right.
That's right.
Oh, if I can just add one.
Oh, yes, we have a question.
Oh,
there.
okay, thank you. I'm also not, another woman in pink, not as familiar with the play, and it sounds just amazing. And I was wondering if I'm correct in assuming that I get the Cordelia, I think that is really cool, like speaking truth to power. And Edward is the same way, right? Speaking truth to power.
Edgar.
Edgar, sorry. Edgar is the same way, speaking truth to power, which is so important.
Yeah, it definitely is a play that deals with, you've got to have the right power at the right time, being meted out by the right people,
Right.
and you know what they say, absolute power corrupts absolutely so often.
Yeah.
So,
Using it well for the right reasons to
Yeah,
benefit the
right.
right people.
Time.
yeah. And this play really does give you a lot of lessons for that.
Yeah.
You were going to
Thank
say
you.
something.
I am. It's actually not about Cordelia because I don't think it is a point that really comes up for her. But as David just said, a lot of Shakespeare is about someone up here being stripped down to nothing.
Yeah.
That happens to Lear. That happens to Edgar. And I think that is how Edgar ends up being the king at the end, is that he's been stripped down to nothing and he learns from it. He learns far earlier than Lear had the opportunity to do so what it is like to be the poor, the helpless, and the hunted.
Yeah, that's good.
And I don't even know that it changes him. It just distills down to him what he needs to do, whereas before he'd been very relatively passive in his character. He was just going to be the next Duke of Gloucester because that's what the law said, and had never really thought about these things. But the choices that he made were, when he had nothing, he still helped people.
He shared his little lean-to with a crazy man and a jester. As soon as he had the opportunity to help his father, even before he forgave him,
Yeah.
he chose to try to help him. And I thought one of the really powerful contrasts to that, and I only got to really see it in the video this week because I was backstage for this point, but one of the biggest contrasts to that was the scene with Cornwall, and he had just gouged out one of Gloucester's eyes and promptly got stabbed by the disgusting servants for it. He was dying, knew he was dying, and he still went back to put out Gloucester's
I
other
know.
eye. It's like the nature. I mean, that is the nature of evil in
Not
one.
enough.
It's like this is how I choose to. And I can do nothing for myself. I can do nothing for anyone else. What I'm going to do is with my last breath is inflict evil
Take you
on
out.
another person.
Yeah.
Even Edmund at the end has his moment where he's like, I'm dying. I recognize I'm dying. I'm going to try for one tiny moment of grace in my life and do something good for another person. It won't benefit me now, but I'm still going to do it. And the contrast right there says a lot about humanity, I think.
Well, this has been fabulous, but we just have a few minutes left, and I would like to ask Alexia, who is really, as I say, she's written on everything from the Vikings to the pirates, and I wanted
Mainly
to...
South Carolina.
Oh, mainly South
I
Carolina.
teach all those other
Center of the
things.
universe.
But would you give us kind of a final word about why should people go online and watch the YouTube version?
The YouTube version is quite exciting, fast-paced, and easy to follow, as opposed to some Shakespearean productions. Secondly, I think you can see, to me, it also points to the folly of trying to control the future generation and limit your children's agency, which is a very modern thing, and we have the helicopter moms, and we have all of this going on in our age.
College
So
entrance scam.
that just came to me today. I was watching YouTube, having seen video, but I really like the YouTube. And I suggest you go, all you have to do is Google
Clarence
Felder
Felder's
and Lear.
adaptation of King Lear.
You don't need all those, just, it'll pop up. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank our panel, Kramer Jr., Aaron Felder, David Lord, Professor Porter, and Professor Helsley, and our dear Cordelia and Fool, and Mr. Michael Well, and the Ulster County Library. Thank you so much. Now, I'm sorry, I have one quick thing to say. Our next production is going to be at Piccolo Spoleto, and it's a repeat. It'll be our third time in Charleston because of popular demand. And some of you got a copy of the little printout there that's in the Piccolo booklet already. It's Frederick Douglass, No Turning Back,
It's great.
starring
Yes, it
Kyle
is.
Taylor. Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah,
It's-
we'll recommend it.
Oh, it's 1 hour of life-changing theater, and Clarence plays the pastor of the church that he's speaking in. And as I said, we have two of our singers that came to join us today. So you'll really love that. Get your tickets, and we'll see you then.
Okay.
God bless you all.